Hello there, dear viewer, and welcome to the first ever Jar Jar Studios plus Star Wars tier list, in which we shall rank not only the original, prequel, and sequel Star Wars films, but also the animated TV shows. As a renowned Star Wars influencer, it is my duty to tell you what to think about these various entries in the Star Wars universe, and your duty to blindly accept my opinion, because my opinion is the only correct one. I understand that not all Star Wars visual media is represented here, but do not fear, dear viewer. I shall add them later once the mainline films have been tended to. Now to our feature presentation. We start with Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, a title that confused fans for about 2 decades. Who is this so-called Phantom Menace? Is it Darth Maul? The dressed in black looks like Satan, horns on his head, scowling face. Definitely not a good guy, Darth Maul. Definitely a menace. Not really all that phantom, though. Perhaps it is Palpatine, a phantom to the Jedi Order as well as a menace. So one would assume that Palpatine is the Phantom Menace. But in the words of the wise master Yoda, there is another. Ooh. The other here in question was the most polarizing character in the franchise at the time. A goofy, swamp-dwelling alien with big ears, a funny way of speaking, who hides his original identity at the first, only to be revealed later on as a powerful master of the Force. Wait, what's that you say? You say that sounds like Master Yoda, not Jar Jar Binks. Oh, that would be an interesting parallel, wouldn't it?
You see the echo of where it all's going to go.
I wonder if there wasn't something there that perhaps George Lucas had more in store for our floppy-eared friend.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
The parallels between Master Yoda and Jar Jar Binks are hard to unsee once they have been seen, as well as Jar Jar's influence at crucial points during the movie. Many times during the movie, George Lucas adds this extremely expensive CGI character to the background of scenes just to have him mouth their lines or wave his hands. It is clear to anyone with a working brain. Jar Jar Binks is a Sith Lord. At the very least, a Force user of the chaotic evil persuasion.
The boy and his mother.
Search your feelings. You know it to be true. The Phantom Menace is a time-tested classic that introduced us to characters such as Newt Gunray, Jar Jar Binks, Qui-Gon Jinn, a young Obi-Wan Kenobi, Rune Hako, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Pre-Chancellor Palpatine, Padme Amidala, Boss Nass, Watto, Darth Maul, Captain Panaka, Mace Motherfucking Windu, Dalte Dauphine, B-1 battle droids, and yes, even Tehao.
We lost the transmission, sir.
Despite being made in 1999, the visuals and graphics in this movie hold up to this day and look astounding. It has one of the best choreographed duels in all of Star Wars, an amazing and exciting pod race, and builds the foundation for a massive expansion into the Star Wars universe. This movie is top tier and can only go into S tier. 10-10, this movie is bound.
Okay, but
next up we have Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Episode 2 builds upon the previously established framework of the Phantom Menace. Jake Lloyd has grown into Hayden Christensen. Obi-Wan grows a mullet. And Yoda is enjoying his newfound freedom after the death of his wife Yaddle. This episode is exceptional in its world building as Obi-Wan and Anakin go their separate ways throughout the film. The locations visited are all very distinct, unique, and intriguing. This film is often criticized for, quote, poor dialogue.
I don't like sand.
And I would agree with this assertion. However, the reality of this fact is also the reason why Attack of the Clones is so quotable.
There was no danger at all.
Combining excellent actors with wooden dialogue is a recipe for this kind of wonderful treat. Attack of the Clones is packed to the brim with action, beauty, drama, and romance. Another batch of awesome characters are added to the franchise in this amazing adventure, namely Jango Fett, Count Dooku, Wat Tambor, Kit Fisto,
Die, Jedi dogs.
Coleman Trebor, Dexter Jetster, the banking clan guy with the big head, and of course the only main critique I have of this film is that the final battle on Geonosis seems a bit lacking. This movie is fantastic, but does not reach the heights of the Phantom Menace, so it gets to be in A tier. On to Revenge of the Sith. I don't need to spend much time on this one. From beginning to end, this entry is completely stuffed to the gills with everything good that I mentioned before. This is the second peak of Star Wars if the franchise was a woman. As you probably guessed, this movie is going into S tier. This movie is phenomenal, 10/10. After this comes the Clone Wars movie. This movie is more like the pilot episode to the Clone Wars. Rather than a movie, you could watch it in canon order with the Clone Wars episodes and not notice a difference. The Clone Wars is a mixed bag. A lot of the earlier episodes were lacking in quality, but were still good fun and built upon previously established lore. This show is like a locomotive steam train. It starts out slow, but after some time it builds an imposing momentum that makes it nigh unstoppable. The latter half of the Clone Wars gave us some of the coolest moments in Star Wars, mostly with the return of Darth Maul. Season 7 is unfortunately a turbulent spectacle, reaching massive highs and very stinky lows. The addition of the goofy, androgynous, broccoli-haired females is an experience everyone could do without. This lands the Clone Wars firmly in B tier. If you took out the lackluster episodes of Season 1 and 2 and removed the garbage from Season 7, the Clone Wars would easily be somewhere between S tier and A tier. Ah, yes. The forgotten, the banished, the reason Disney stopped making Star Wars movies, Solo, a difficult one to rank.
Why?
Why? Because as a standalone film, this movie is pretty good.
What?
The biggest problems with this film would be fixed if the main character was just another smuggler rather than Han Solo. The fact that the movie wants you to think he is Han Solo is why this movie doesn't work, because it retcons the character and the writers do a very lazy job of revealing the origins of Han Solo's iconic items. From how he got his last name, his inexplicable ability to speak Wookiee, to how he gets his blaster. What's the name of that substance? Ah, yes, Contrivium. Disney seems to have a never-ending supply of that stuff, and it makes their products distastefully artificial and bland. The other big problem is the tiny little ginger girl and her band of flag smashers. Oh, sorry, wrong TV show, I meant Marauders. The movie could have been written better if they were not in it. The most common judgments against this film have to do with L337. People rage against this machine as though it were their real-life political rival. I must be frank. I love this character. She's one of the best things about this movie and probably the reason I would want to watch it again. One of the best comedy relief characters that Disney has created, and her consciousness being downloaded into the Millennium Falcon's hyperdrive is one of the few retcons that I can accept as canon. L337 is, in my opinion, a satirical commentary on your local social justice warrior. They are loud, rude, obnoxious, robotic, lacking in any kind of self-awareness or nuance, and ultimately will pay the price for their foolish nature. Solo goes into C tier. I wish I could rank it higher, but alas, it shouldn't be called Solo, and the Han Solo in that film needs to be renamed. Now on to Rebels. In similar fashion to Clone Wars, Rebels starts out slow and gets better as the seasons progress. All the characters seem to have their own version of Child Ahsoka cringe, except Kanan and Hera, who are like the mommy and daddy to this gaggle of edgy babies. The best moments in this show are created by the villains. The Grand Inquisitor, Darth Vader, and Maul, formerly Darth. I know you wanted to see the same thing as me. You wanted to see Maul fight Darth Vader, didn't you? Rebels isn't the best, but it is good Star Wars. It gets B tier. Rogue One, the Halo Reach of the Star Wars franchise. I am almost convinced some of the story was just stolen from Halo Reach. Rogue One ends where the very first Star Wars movie begins, in exactly the same way that Halo Reach ends where the very first Halo game begins. In Rogue One, the rebels are running data about the Death Star to a ship, and in Halo Reach, Noble Team is running a fragment of Cortana to the Pillar of Autumn. In Halo Reach, the planet is glassed, and in Rogue One, the Scarif base is blasted to bits. Both stories have the teams that are working to achieve these goals die. There are other comparisons to Halo Reach and Rogue One, but I shan't get into it at the moment. This film fits very well within the Star Wars universe and respectfully builds upon the established world. My main critique with the film is that Jyn is not much of a protagonist, but rather just follows the story wherever it takes her. She is honestly not very compelling. Also, I really needed to see Saw Gerrera do something crazy. Hopefully we get that in the second season of Andor. Rogue One gets beat tier. A New Hope? The film that gave birth to this whole fantastic world. A solid standalone film that could have never had a sequel and wouldn't have needed one. This is the film on which the entire franchise rests, and without it, the rest of the films would be flopping around in space like a purrgil without tentacles. It belongs in S tier. Empire Strikes Back is a perfect sequel to A New Hope. The best parts of the whole film is when Luke is with Master Yoda. His goofy antics bring a smile to my face every time. I think that it can tend to be a bit overrated, though. It gets A tier.
What?
Yes, let the hate flow through you. Return of the Jedi is the bow that wraps up this birthday present. Well, at least until Disney rips it off and throws it in the trash. What can I say? It strikes a perfect balance between dark and dramatic to hilarious and hopeful. Many people are of the mind that the Ewoks are a problem in this film, and that it would be better if they were Wookiees instead. Without the Ewoks, this film would not have been nearly as enjoyable to watch. Luke is an absolute unit in this film. A force to be reckoned with, and every time he takes out his lightsaber, you know someone is going to get wrecked. And of course, Palpatine.
I'm looking forward to completing your training.
Ian McDiarmid plays a perfect villain in this movie. A bitter old man who has an insatiable lust for power, and whose only joy is corrupting the young and twisting them into his own image. This movie would be an S tier if it were not for the musical number in Jabba's palace. Mandalorian Season 1 and 2 is peak Disney Star Wars. I honestly have no idea how this show ever got made by Lucasfilm. The stories are simple and smaller in scale. Each episode had me interested and excited to see the next. The main character, Din Djarin, is a calm, cool, collected gunslinger out for hire. The side characters are full of life, and the main villain, played by Giancarlo Esposito, is menacing. Season 1 and 2 belong in S tier, even despite their connections to the sequel trilogy. Season 3 has thus far been pointless, boring, and unfocused garbage. It belongs in C tier. There has been an awakening. Have you felt it? The Force Awakens is where the problems begin. The rise of the First Order, the original trilogy characters all splitting up and becoming shells of their former selves, the contrived nonsense of the plot. Many others have gone into great detail to explain why this movie is bad, and I agree with them. However, a part of the film still grows on me. It is time for me to confess my feelings. There are artistic elements of this film that I enjoy. Many of the actors perform their poorly written characters too well for me to hate this film completely. The actors that play the characters bring life to this corporate cash grab. Daisy Ridley, Adam Driver, John Boyega, Oscar Isaac, and old Harrison Ford all deliver an endearing performance. It gets B tier. Oh dear, this is... well, The Last Jedi is a glorious mess. I remember seeing this movie in theaters. I knew before I went that Carrie Fisher had already passed away and was curious how they were going to write her out of the movie. Boy, was I in for a surprise. My expectations were, well, they were, shall we say, subverted. There I was, watching the space battle in the beginning of the movie, disappointed at Poe Dameron's "Yo Mama" joke.
Your mother.
Then all of a sudden, Kylo Ren is flying towards the Resistance's flagship. The tension builds, Kylo senses his mother, and he can't bring himself to do it. And suddenly his support fighters fire their torpedoes, destroying the bridge and subverting my expectations. I sat in the theater while the sad music played and thought to myself, oh, is this it? Well, that is an unexpected send-off for Leia, I suppose. Then the music swelled and she opened her eyes and started flying through space. I was so stunned I nearly blurted out, what the f*** am I watching? It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever seen. Well, until my eyes were blessed to see Luke milking the seaside titty monster. The Last Jedi certainly subverted my expectations, though not really in a good way. After being rejected by his snow bunny Rey, Finn becomes a passport bro and travels across the galaxy with his new Asian waifu Rose Tico. Poe Dameron falls in love with a superior officer in a ball gown, and Rey spends most of her time with Luke, confused with the audience on why Luke is hiding on this island in the middle of nowhere. The Star Wars universe as a whole was torn apart even more than in The Force Awakens, and all of the redeeming qualities about the previous film were tossed aside. Remember that Episode 7 put Luke on the island, but it was Rian Johnson that made Luke into an old, crusty hermit that gave up on life. Until that point, his hiding on Ahch-To was a mystery box set up by J.J. Abrams. Snoke's identity became irrelevant after Kylo killed him, and Rey's parents were supposedly nobodies. Ships running out of fuel and slowing down, Ghostmaster Yoda using lightning and interacting with the physical world by bopping Luke on the forehead, and hyperspace ramming are things that cannot be canon in Star Wars, as they would break the physics of the world George Lucas created. The Last Jedi gets D tier, though I want to raise it up one just because of the awful hilarity. Somehow Palpatine returns, a line that will live in infamy. The Rise of Skywalker is the Uno reverse card that makes this trilogy ascend to new heights. This movie is terrible, but also terribly fun. The return of Palpatine was the worst and best thing about this film. We got to see a third rendition of this character, and I enjoyed every bit of it. If there is one thing we can thank J.J. Abrams for, it's more Palpatine memes.
Look what you have made.
All the main characters being together was what should have been in The Last Jedi. The Rise of Skywalker gives us one of the best characters Disney has ever created. Babu Frik. I was hoping to see more than just a cameo in Mando Season 3, and I was let down. Even though this trilogy was awful, it was in many ways fixed by Rey being a Palpatine.
Ironic.
An ironic twist that left Palpatine as the victor over the Skywalkers. His granddaughter even stole their name, tarnishing it for the rest of time. Rest in peace, Palpatine, you magnificent bastard.
Rey Skywalker.
Ultimately, despite all of the awful writing, there's plenty of memorable material in these movies, and I can enjoy them for that, as well as the marvelous song and dance performed by the actors. As mentioned before in my comments on The Force Awakens, despite the terrible story writing and world-breaking physics, the performers in this film charmed me. I love Kylo Ren, Rey Palpatine, Finn, Rose Tico, Poe Dameron, and General Hux. Thank you for your delightful exhibition. The Rise of Skywalker gets a tier. I know you can see the little picture down below of Star Wars Resistance, but I have not seen it, so it's just going to stay right where it is. The Book of Boba Fett. I went into this series with high expectations, especially with the badass return of Boba Fett in Season 2 of The Mandalorian. His intro in Chapter 14 was barbaric, savage, and primitive. He kicked ass in Mandalorian, and I expected him to do it again in his own show. Alas, he ended up being irresolute, seemingly determined to make his right-hand gal Fennec Shand the leader instead of himself. His party of cyberpunk hooligans, pigs, and his walking carpet was pitiful and toothless. The first 2 episodes were good, but they set up the expectation that Boba would unite the Tusken tribes and generate his own sovereign domain on Tatooine. Instead, we got a disjointed horde of cameos that consistently misdirected the audience. Throughout the show, Boba disappointingly and persistently makes the dumbest of mistakes. The writing of the show was a failure, which is too bad, because I like Tamora Morrison. Book of Boba Fett gets C tier. Andor. Peak Star Wars content? If you like stodgy, trite, mundane, uninteresting, cyberpunk dystopias. Andor is slow. It is not fun. But you say it's so dark, serious, and there is no fan service. Yes, that is exactly the problem. Cameos where there should be none is a problem, like in Book of Boba Fett. But no cameos where there should be some is also a problem. I should have seen Sly Moore, Masamida, or Jar Jar Binks in the Senate, or at one of the parties that ginger woman throws. And how come I get to see my boy Saw Gerrera, but he doesn't blow something up or torture anyone? Andor is way overrated. I appreciate the attention to detail and that they actually tried to make something decent, but it was rather mid. Andor gets B tier at best. Kenobi, or shall I say the Reva and Baby Leia show. This show is complete garbage. Not only is the writing trash and attempts to retcon the very first Star Wars movie, the directing is also trash, and I am certain the cameraman was having a seizure the entire time during filming. Sorry, Deborah Chow's directing was awful. Somebody with more experience should have been given the job to handle what is one of the most beloved characters in the franchise. In addition to the abysmal writing and directing, the show looks atrocious. The lightsabers Disney uses shed way too much light on the actors. The Inquisitor's costumes are ghastly and inaccurate, and the size and scale of everything was extremely inconsistent. The only time I felt anything was during the Clone Wars flashback, and they couldn't even be bothered to make either of them look young. Instead, YouTubers did it in a day with iPhone filters. This show from beginning to end was a total disgrace. Disney might as well have taken $100 million, put it on a pallet in the middle of a field and set it on fire. I hate the Kenobi show with every fiber of my being. It is the worst Star Wars content I have ever seen, and it is going into F tier. The Ewok movie, Caravan of Courage, is a lovable cringe fest.
I wish we had furries like you where I came from.
It is not good, but it is charming and winsome. The child acting is poor, but in a way that makes everything hilarious.
No, Mace, no!
The creature's set pieces are creative and diverse. The story is simple and the narrator is perfect.
Our story begins in a time long, long ago, deep in an enchanted forest.
Oh, that's me. This movie goes into D tier. Ewoks. The Battle for Endor is the sequel to the first Ewok movie. It does the same things that the Ewok movie does, but it is better in every way. More of the cringe is removed, the fun is cranked up, and the final battle is epic, relatively speaking. There are still plenty of goofy elements, but they work to the story's favor. The final battle is funny in many ways. In ordinary circumstances, the Ewoks would have lost, but just before the battle begins, the enemy side is all in their base getting plastered. Once the fighting begins, it is totally believable that this little band of furballs were able to best the far superior and greater in number marauders because of how drunk they were. This film is pretty good, actually. I give it B tier. So what did you think of this tier list? What would yours look like? I would love to hear your incorrect and inferior opinion. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to Jar Jar Studios Plus for the best Star Wars content on the internet. Thank you for watching, and until next time, may the Force be...
Oh, Maxie bit the Force.